Welcome to the webinar. We will start in a couple minutes. We'll let some folks trickle in here. Okay, thanks for joining us for our webinar today, Mastering EPR Reporting, the Power of Standardized Sustainability Data. I think in just a second, we'll get started here. All right, let's get going. Hello, my name is Katie Krass. I am a senior product manager at SpecRite, and I am joined by Caroline, the director of sustainability from Atlantic. I was just about to say your last name and realized I might butcher that. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Caroline Deloach, rhymes with coach, so relatively simple. I'm the sustainability director at Atlantic. And among other things, I help our customers think through the impacts that EPR is going to have on the kinds of packaging that they should be using, and help them think through the kinds of transitions that they may want to make to reduce their fees.
Amazing. Thank you. And I sit on the data side over here, so we are, trying to help customers understand what to do with the EPR reporting coming down. We of course house their specification data and try to help them with the reporting readiness. So let's dive into today's topics. On the agenda today, we are going to go over some of the EPR regulations as they are today, the EPR data challenge, SpecRite's EPR reporting templates, and finish it off with the power of standardization. And we'll have some Q&A at the end, so please do share your questions as we go along, and we have someone monitoring that channel so we can answer those questions at the end here. Let's get started. All right, so as we know, EPR in the US is not stopping. It has been big and growing and changing. I think that the one thing we know for certain is that change is inevitable here. And Caroline, I know that you had some thoughts to share on this one too.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that this map is changing constantly. Like every time someone on my team asks, like, "Hey, do I have the latest version of that EPR map slide?" The answer is probably no, because this is changing so often. One of the things I think is important to note here is that this is not just a West Coast problem. This is happening clearly on both coasts and in the middle of the country. Those states that are in black are the ones that have, full-fledged EPR programs that are either already started or starting imminently. And then of course you see that EPR is being discussed in a bunch of other states. If you had to ask me which ones I think are most likely to be next, it might be like New York, Connecticut, or New Jersey, maybe. But this momentum is really happening. And again, it doesn't matter where your company is based. You don't have to be based in one of these states in order to be affected. This affects you if you are selling into one of the states that's currently in black. So I have a lot of customers who wind up asking, like, well, should I be changing the kind of packaging that I'm using, like just on the West Coast, maybe? Like, well, no, I mean, because this is happening in different spots throughout the country, it doesn't make sense to change the kind of packaging that's coming out of your Reno, Nevada facility just because of EPR, but not one of these on the East Coast. So that's why this is having nationwide effects, even though we only have these 7 states so far.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Let's dive into a little bit of a timeline here. So we've got this color-coded by state. So if you were looking for a cheat sheet on the dates that are coming up, here it is for you. We'll give you a minute to take a look at this. But we've got some of the dates that have passed. We have gone through a few reports already, about to be 3 reports. So congratulations to everybody who has done that successfully so far. Um, but of course, EPR, it's only becoming more and more relevant. We've done the Oregon report, we've done the Colorado report, California is coming up here, and so we just need to get uh, all of our ducks in a row for this reporting.
The only other thing I'll add here that sometimes pops up is like I'm having a lot of trouble keeping up with all of the deadlines. Like, is this going to be standardized in the future? And we do have some reason to think that over time that the date that reports will be due will be standardized to May 31st of every year. So if you feel like these dates are all over the place, that's because they are, but that's because we're in startup mode for a lot of these. But to the extent that's allowable from the laws, hopefully we can get some standardization of at least when reports are due each year. So just be on the lookout for those developments in the next couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And of course, yeah, we're all taking a look at what CAA is putting out there for that information. And I just wanted to touch a little bit as well on the risks of, what happens if you don't report or if you're reporting inaccurately. We've got financial fines and penalties. It could be you could be facing supply chain disruptions if you are no longer able to send your product into a certain state. Loss of brand trust. If you have a loyal band of customers who care about what your company is doing in regards to environmental policies, and also just generally a loss of competitive advantage if that kind of comes out. And so those last two are kind of joined here. And so I will say that if your company has done reporting for Europe, EPR, the stakes are higher here with the new U.S. Laws and regulations. And so, if you're worried, not sure what the next step is to take, then that's why we're here to help.
And keep in mind, these financial fines and penalties are not paltry. Like in Oregon, for the first violation, it's up to $25,000 a day, right? So like it's worth on top of this to avoid some of those fines. We haven't seen fines come down on anyone yet, and the states do have the statutory authority to levy interest on fees that aren't paid, things like that. We don't again know that has happened yet, but it easily could. So you might as well stay ahead of this. And there's some questions about like, well, can I fly under the radar and no one will know that I didn't report? CAA has published a list of the producers who have registered in at least Colorado and Oregon. I think that's it so far. But that means that, your competitor could look at that list and say like, hey, I don't see my competitor on here. There's kind of an incentive to tell on your competitor who isn't on that list, because why should I be paying fees if my competitor isn't? So it creates this free rider problem. So I think over time, there isn't going to be a lot of ability to skirt this system and just not report.
Yeah, thanks. So continuing on here, let's get into a bit of our data challenge. When we at SpecRite put out a survey every year asking customers and non-customers alike about their data practices, one of the questions we ask is, what is your company's biggest challenge related to specification management? And we get 44% of respondents say that they don't have clear access to necessary data. Data is all over the place in different silos, shared drives, on individual people's computers, spreadsheets, emails, with suppliers, and it's hard to get all of that in one place, which has been one of the hardest things to get for reporting so far. and even though we've made it through the initial reporting for 2, almost 3 states, the majority of the industry just still isn't well set up for next year's reports. This year was a lot of a scramble to get enough information to report, but there wasn't necessarily a focus on the systems that will help us with future reports. And so likely the next few reports will be just as painful unless we change the strategy and how we're storing data to be more of a repeatable process. So here we can take a look at all of those data silos, from Excel sheets to shared drives, email. Again, this is from our survey that we send out, and you can see data is truly everywhere. And we know it's hard to get all of this information into one location. And Caroline, I'm curious about what you're seeing like companies report out on data and like the various issues that this is causing.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I mean, I haven't seen my customers' reports that they're sending into CAA or anything, but I do know that a lot of them are telling me like we just don't have insight into all of our packaging spec data. Like maybe they do a good job keeping up with the specs for their actual product, but not the packaging. Maybe they don't keep either very well. But I mean, I hear all the time, like we're just keeping track of this in Excel and every team like handles it a little bit differently. Trying to gather this stuff from our suppliers is really difficult because we don't have all of it, but our suppliers do. It takes weeks to get things back from suppliers when we've made requests. I've only ever talked to one company over the last couple of years that is happy about the way that they're currently managing their packaging specs, and that's because they were a large CPG company that had developed their own software for that, which like most of us do not have the ability and bandwidth to do. And I mean, this is pain that we're feeling on the Atlantic side as well, to be honest. Like we are an obligated producer for the packaging that goes around our packaging, which is kind of meta in the EPR world, but I'm our reporting contact, and I can tell you it is extremely painful. First of all, to figure out like what products are we even obligated for, getting a pull down of those data in Excel from whatever the ERP system is, and then trying to estimate sometimes what is the packaging that we have associated with this. And that feels really risky right now to just be making these as estimations. So I'm personally feeling this very deeply and wishing for better ways to be keeping all of this, which is part of the reason that we wound up partnering with SpecRite, is because this just feels like such an obvious longer term solution for how we should all be thinking about holding on to our specs. Because I know that there are a lot of reporting contacts out there who are experiencing the pain that I am right now with reporting and at much larger scales.
Absolutely. And since you are, a supplier to so many companies as well, how are people contacting you to get data? Is it, just emails? Are you getting Excel files? Are you getting, different systems? What's that looking like when folks are asking for, the data from you, their supplier?
Yeah, it's entirely emails in Excel right now. A lot of times we'll get an urgent email from a customer who reached out to their salesperson, who eventually tracked me down, and then they say, "Hey, I need to know everything that we sold to this customer and the weights of all of it." It's like, oh gosh, like we don't have that either. That's a really big problem. And so this isn't just the brands needing to be keeping better track of their data, but also anyone who's manufacturing or distributing any of this stuff. Like we all need to be doing better in keeping track of this. And I will say, just kind of like seeing the forest from the trees on all of it, like we will all benefit from having better data about this stuff, because we'll be able to see like, wow, we are using a lot of packaging for that particular SKU. Like, is that really necessary? And so there are cost saving opportunities in here if we have visibility into it from the data. But yeah, I mean, right now I just get all of these requests over email, and it's usually like, hey, we needed this yesterday. Can you fill out this Excel sheet with everything that you sell to us and all of the weights and dimensions? And usually, honestly, right now, we and no one else can really get it back very quickly. And so we all need to be working in a better system.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can only imagine that it's, tiring as a supplier as well to be getting,
Yes,
those requests from so many people,
for sure.
uh, so often. Well, one of the reasons that, we invited Caroline to come to today's webinar with us is because she is part of a new initiative that SpecRite has been on and leading, which is our sustainable packaging data council. And the mission of this group is to create resources to drive awareness, quality, and readiness of EPR information needs. So what we've done, and this is not a spec right organization. Our goal here was to get together a band of suppliers, brands, consultants, tech providers like ourselves, so that we could get everyone that's involved in the chain of EPR reporting and data sharing into one room, to say, okay, what's the information that's needed, what are the difficulties, what are best practices, and summarize all of those needs and really create a resource for the industry, so that if you are coming into EPR for the first time, and you say, okay, what data do I need? There can be a resource for you, and a first step there. Um, so far, the council has put out a report for Oregon EPR data requirements, and we're quickly scaling to California and Colorado, and we'll scale to other regions as well. Caroline, what has been kind of your experience with the data council? Why did you guys join?
I think we were hearing a lot of customers saying, okay, we hear you. We all need to be doing this EPR reporting thing. But given that we're not collecting any of this data right now, like what fields should we even be including for the different reports? And diving into the regulation and all the guidance, I mean, you could get under the impression really easily that like we need to collect like 100 different fields. And thankfully, it's not really true. And I think what has been really valuable about the discussions within the council is that we've gone through in sometimes excruciating detail which fields are absolutely necessary to include, which ones are nice to haves that could help validate your data, and which ones are truly not necessary right now, but maybe could be in the future that you should be looking out for. And because this is a group of people who are pretty plugged into the EPR conversations across states, we've been able to say like, oh, you don't really need that for Oregon, but you're definitely going to want that for Colorado. And so thinking about the states more holistically, given that we're in this really awkward patchwork right now, has been valuable. So I'm hoping that people are able to look at this template and say, okay, I'm not collecting anything right now. What are the things that I absolutely need to be including as I'm trying to figure out how to report for the first time? So, and actually, Katie, how can people access this after the webinar, or if they're looking for it right now?
Yeah, fantastic question. So we have this posted on the SpecRite website. So you can go there and search for the Oregon EPR or search Data Council. I think any of the search terms should bring you to our page where you can download this resource. But I just want to reiterate, this is not a SpecRite resource. This is truly a resource from the 13, more than 13 actually now, different brands and companies that were a part of this initiative. And so one of the things that I wanted to go over today, and we can go to the next slide here, is kind of an example of what goes on in the data council. And this is just to share like what the kind of a look behind the curtain of, what was the process of this report coming out? Why should I trust what's in here? And how is it kind of gonna serve and reflect my place in the EPR data chain here. And so we have a little example scenario here of defining material composition detail levels. So let's paint the scene. Over on the left here, we've got different personas. So We have SpecRite. So we're in the conversation. We also have other data companies, but we'll just say SpecRite for now. We have brand owners and retailers, packaging, and a couple different packaging groups. And so everyone is coming into the conversation with different perspectives. So SpecRite is coming in here and saying, hey, when we're talking about material composition, what are all the materials that are going into your single packaging component? It's great to have as many details as you can because that'll allow you to do so many more things. Brand owners and retailers, their perspective is, okay, whatever we do, I need to gather all of this data from all of my suppliers. So it needs to be, easy to gather or, clearly understandable for, folks across different countries or, just if they're not even packaging engineers, they have to understand what we're asking of them. We have some packaging suppliers with IP concerns about sharing, detailed material compositions because this is something that they have developed and are concerned about, sharing widely. So they want to share, the most minimal details as possible so that they can protect their intellectual property. And then we have other packaging suppliers who are prepared to provide detailed material compositions. Maybe they're not as worried about IP in less of a IP heavy industry. So maybe talking about like the paper world versus plastic world, we might have more IP concerns on that side. So this is just a quick perspective of all of the some of the different folks that are in the room. And the conversation begins with, okay, I need to, what do we do here? What do we recommend? And the lens here is for Oregon. What do we recommend people collect for Oregon reporting in order to get that EPR report done? Okay, so painted the scene here. Caroline, what were some of your thoughts as we had this conversation and everyone was coming in with different thoughts and ideas?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure what to say. That I mean, we were coming in as we're being asked for this information all the time, and it is also clear to us that the people who are asking us for this information don't know what fields they need to have completed. And so we're kind of maybe packaging supplier group C, where our pain point is being asked for data that we don't necessarily have, but that we don't really think that our customers should need either in order to do accurate EPR reporting. So it isn't just about improving the reporting experience for brands, but also reducing some of the pain upstream for those of us who are being asked to provide this data. If we can all be singing off the same sheet of music for these are the fields that we should all generally be collecting for the sake of accurate EPR reporting, then we will save ourselves a lot of headache.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that back to the theme of today's webinar, right? The power of standardized reporting. The standardization that we're talking about isn't necessarily just at your company. It's really across the whole EPR data chain. If, like you said, I love how you said that. If we can all sing off the same sheet of music, if we all kind of agree on, the data points that are required, that minimum data points that are required, then we can make better decisions that aren't hurting people for making them go and track down so much more data than is necessary, like you've mentioned. So just to kind of cap this off here, we can go to the next slide. Oh, and actually, one last thing. I didn't share a conclusion. So what ended up happening from this discussion, and again, this was one single data point that we're kind of painting the perspective on here, and we did this with like every single data point that we talked about, plus more that we didn't end up including in the list. But for the Oregon lens that we were looking at, we agreed that having the majority material was sufficient in order to do your Oregon reporting. And so we're going to continue doing that for each region. The perspective is different for the California reporting, of course. And so we'll have kind of a side-by-side analysis of California, Oregon, Colorado, and more as they come down. Okay, so now to finish it up, what we're looking at here on the right, you can see this is an example of the different of what our report looks like. So we've got different product level information, we have component level information, and for each point we've stated whether we think it's required or recommended. And in the report, we also have each kind of data attribute and a definition of what that is, and as well why it's needed. So whether that is in order to compile an effective report, if it is to understand or to kind of validate another data point that needs support, then we've listed why that's needed in there. So if one of them isn't applicable to your company because of the why it's needed, then that's something that you can also remove from your data gathering exercises.
And I think it's helpful to see, like in some of the examples that are on the right, some of the things that we drill down into are, well, maybe we don't need to have a full answer to a question, but rather just have it be like a yes, no binary, and to try to make that easier it's easier for people to answer a yes or no question sometimes than it is to fill out something longer. So like, I think brand name is an interesting example here where it's helpful to have like the brand name of the product in there, but really like what we're trying to get after is, are you the brand owner? And it can be useful to have the brand name to validate some of the information that you're getting, but ultimately what matters for are you the responsible producer is the yes no question, are you the brand owner? So we tried to be very careful here of not asking or not suggesting that people be keeping track of more information than they necessarily need. If the reporting can be done accurately with an answer to a yes, no question, that's what we did. So really tried to make that as easy as possible without collecting more info than was needed.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so that concludes our little segue into the Data Council. So we will move on into just a little summary on, the power of standardization. And the reason that we're investing in standardization is to make reporting durable. A common model means that Oregon, Colorado, California, Maine, EU, EPR reports can be supported without rebuilding your spec library, but like slightly differently because they need different data points every time. So it can also force governance at the point of data capture instead of during the scramble to report. So that means we can make sure that when you're getting your data from suppliers or inputting it yourself as packaging engineers, you can validate the format of the data that is coming in. So if you need it to be a certain number of decimal places, or if you need this, you can, instead of having a bunch of open text fields that are difficult to report on, make something a list of choices that you can use instead. And so once data is standardized, it really stops being EPR only data once you put it into a system, because then it becomes reusable. So you can use it for things like ESG, LCAs, internal design decisions, and it can also help you be more defensible for audits in the future. We haven't seen those happen yet since we've just done our reporting, or at least I haven't heard of anyone who's gotten audited. But surely that will likely be coming, and is something to keep in mind when you're doing those reports. And so data standardization and digitization is really how we stop doing EPR as a one-time project and start being EPR ready as a function. And to wrap it up here before we get into questions, just a look ahead. And you don't want to be the team that's reacting every time something changes. Certainly, the most successful teams that we work with have made EPR readiness a continuous process. And so, challenge to you is to start now, even if it's small. And your future self will certainly thank you. All right, I think that's all we got for slides here today. And we can roll into questions. And I think that we're going to try to let everyone out a little bit on the early side.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was all so much good information. This is all really interesting and coming up fast. We have a few questions in the chat. So first, we have a question about how the regulations in the US compare to the ones in the EU and kind of the overlap in those two. And how are we combating both at the same time? Because obviously we're talking about EPR here, but in the EU, it's still super relevant. So I don't know if you have an answer to that.
Fantastic question. All right, so how does the EU differ from the US? Well, one thing I'll say about how they're the same is that they're both changing a lot right now. Of course, the EU has had EPR for much longer than the US. It's brand new here. What's interesting is that the US laws that are coming out now have been able to learn from the EPR laws that have been around for a long time in the EU. And so one of the things that is kind of different is the US laws are coming out with teeth. Immediately. We had the slide on what are the risks of noncompliance. And in working with some consultants in the EPR space, I remember one of them saying that they had a company come to them concerned about the US EPR reporting that they needed to do, and then said, was I supposed to do reporting in the EU this whole time? And she said, yes, you were. And so I think it's indicative of, there's a definite difference in, what reporting was and what it is now in the US. And with the PPWR, that is also getting an overhaul in the EU. What's cool is that it's, a standardization practice in the EU. So kind of what we wish would happen in the US, where every state could be the same, that is kind of happening over in the EU. So I think that we're destined to kind of trail a little behind on some of what the EU is doing there. But I think that hopefully we can kind of learn from that and make standardization happen more and more as more states come out with their different laws.
Awesome. And then we have a part 2 to this question, which I think you partially just answered, but someone is talking about how for a lot of retailers, there's the risk of double declaration where people are putting in the same information twice. So how can SpecRite help avoid these risks and blockers in that manner?
Okay, so I'm not sure if this is double declaration of people the same company paying twice, or perhaps different companies both paying. If it's on double declaration of doing too much reporting for a single product on as you're the brand. How SpecRite can help is we have a single we really help you to understand what your products are and what those bills of materials are, have approval processes around those. So because of the data governance kind of requirements of a spec system, those can help you to ensure that the data that you have that you're going to do reporting on is a lot more trustworthy than the, Excel spreadsheets of old. And so to make sure that you have all of the right packaging data, and you're not, double weight counting anything like that.
Yeah, definitely.
I will say on the opposite scenario of the other double declaration possibility of, are we the obligated producer of this, or is somebody else the obligated producer of this? We've had a couple conversations around that for some questionable products, and honestly have just needed to reach out to another company in that other part of the supply chain and say, hey, here's how we're reading the law and regulation that you're the responsible producer of this product. Like, do you read this the same way that we do? And there have been some interesting conversations that have come out of that. And we've even tried to do a little bit of just covering ourselves in case there were any questions of that in our methodology in when we've submitted to CAA by saying, we and this other company read the document like this. Therefore, we decided that company would be the obligated producer for that product. And so we've even kind of come out together and said, this is how we're reading it, and this is who is taking accountability for those items, and just putting that in our methodology just so that it's documented somewhere. So if that's part of the question, it may require some communication with others in your supply chain, but there are ways to create that kind of justification.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing, if you were to bring that type of conversation into SpecWrite, is, we're a fairly flexible system. So you can, like Caroline was talking about with the, different brand owner, brand name fields that were in the data document, you can add additional fields in SpecWrite. So if you wanted to, for each, packaging component, specify in SpecWrite, who's the obligated producer, you could do such a thing. Or maybe you break it down into different questions, because those obligated producers can change by states. So it's always my recommendation to go a little bit down a data layer to get to the source of what the question is, instead of just asking, the question that is in one of the EPR kind of reporting guidelines.
Awesome. That was a great answer. Love that. Awesome. So the next question is related to kind of the difference of the EPR requirements across states. So obviously we talked a lot about California, but how does this compare to Oregon or Colorado or something like that? And then how are Atlantic Packaging and SpecWrite helping to address these kind of unique requirements?
California is a fun one. So I think that what's interesting, and I'll kind of start with perhaps why it's not so scary, is if you look at the documents to actually do the reporting between Oregon and California, the format of them isn't too crazy. California does have additional reporting material categories, and they also have an additional column for number of plastic components. So that is, at the end of the day, what you need to give California, so those are the differences. But from the what's different perspective, how you're putting California items into groups is different. They're asking us to do a lot more digging into the materials that go into each of our products in California. So for example, if you have a label, then that is technically comprised of two components. So you might have your paper label and the adhesive. And the adhesive is a plastic component. So they count that as one plastic component in your paper label. So your paper label goes into a paper with plastic category, and you'll mark it as one plastic component. So it's different for how to put things into the right buckets. I think that one of the risks here, and it's not one company's risk, this is truly everybody doing the reporting. Information at that level is not widely shared right now. And so doing our best to, either make the assumptions or actually have the data is all we can do right now to do our best. And so I think that putting a stance out there, like Caroline said, there's a lot you can do with stating your methodologies for things. So if you want to say, all right, my methodology for labels is just generally they have one plastic component, so I'm doing that, or different things like that. You can try to get ahead of what California is asking for. Caroline, I know that you probably have a different outlook on California since you've been doing the reporting actually at Atlantic. So what has that looked like for you? How has it been different for you?
Well, I mean, I guess the question that keeps coming back that people have had that's a version of this question is there one of these states that's the strictest that if I comply with that one, I will have complied with everything else? And I wish that it were as simple as saying, like, well, just comply with California and you'll have everything else figured out. California is the most data intensive, as Katie was saying, where you need to present the most disaggregated information about plastic components and such. And for the most part, I think if you wanted to collect your information in a California specific way and then extrapolate it to the other states, you mostly could. It's the place where that gets difficult is that there are a few places in which the states have different material categories for things that you might think of as kind of the same thing. And so you do kind of have to pay attention to some of your biggest material categories and think about if you were to try to match up the material categories across all the different states. So just as an example, and this was one that I gave on our webinar about this topic last week, is in Oregon, you have two categories for flexible LDPE. They're actually categories for HDPE and LDPE together, but one of them is just for stretch wrap and one of them is for everything else. And then in California, there are also multiple categories for LDPE, specifically film, some of them that are like clear non-bag films and some of them that are like bag specific. And so some of this has to do with just how they phrase what falls into different material categories. And so something like pallet stretch film, which is one of these like really ubiquitous materials that we're all dealing with, could look like it's falling into like slightly different categories in different states, not to mention the fact that Colorado doesn't include B2B packaging. And so stretch wrap is excluded entirely. And so you kind of need to look at some of these materials that are the highest volume for you and understand pretty carefully what material category do they fall into in the different states so that you don't wind up mischaracterizing or miscategorizing them. It's obviously not the end of the world if you do, but you might wind up underpaying or overpaying depending on how you categorize things, which then of course brings up the question of, well, can the material list be standardized between states? And wouldn't that be lovely? And I think that we would all be very glad to get to a situation in which the covered material lists were the same across states. I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, but I think that there is pressure to get there eventually. And I know that to the extent that it is within their power, CAA is going to try to get us all there, but they're limited by what each state's actual law and regulations say. So I would say that if you need to comply with the strictest state, like do look at California, but understand that there are nuances within the other states that don't necessarily make California the strictest, they just make it different. So unfortunately, that does necessitate paying attention to the different states. Hopefully that's helpful.
Definitely. That was great. Thank you both. Okay, we have one more question just to wrap it up. So if someone is kind of just starting out on their EPR journey, what would be your recommendation for like where they start? Because obviously there's a lot of complexities to all these things and like it's different across states, across countries. So what would be your recommendation for where they start?
Great question. I think that it entirely changes based on the size of your company and, how many SKUs you're looking at, how much you're selling. If you have a very interconnected, complicated, and large list of products that you're selling, I think that getting into a standardized system is one of the most beneficial things that you can do, because you'll be able to do reporting very easily once you get everything into one spot, and all the kind of granular details. I would definitely take a look at the Oregon report that we were talking about today. And again, we have a couple more coming for California and Colorado as well. So that'll become more robust. But I think it's a really good place to start if you truly don't have your data, haven't requested data from your suppliers or gotten it yourself. It is a good place to start with, here, what's the base level information that I need. And so either if you're, going to send an Excel request to your suppliers, or if you're going to, build up a system in order to put that into, that's, making sure that you have the data that can answer all of the questions, is I think where I would start.
Yeah, it's funny because I came at it from a different angle of, oh, I just figured out that I'm an obligated producer. I haven't reported anywhere yet, so I'm kind of behind the eight ball. Like, where should I even start?
Mm.
And what I would recommend is if you have determined that you are an obligated producer in Oregon or Colorado, whose first reporting deadlines have already passed, and or in California, the first report for which is due November 15th, I would go ahead and try to comply retroactively in Colorado and Oregon. We have reason to think that late submissions are better than no submissions. So I wouldn't just not submit. I would go ahead and get registered with CAA and just try to get caught up. There is a problem with a lot of producers not realizing that they're obligated. And I mean, there are obviously a lot of regulations to keep up with. And so it's very understandable that this could have just passed somebody by. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to pay a fine. You may even avoid some fines if you're able to just go ahead and try to get something reported. And I think it's understandable and very common right now for a lot of those reports, if you're not using a system like SpecRate, for a lot of those reports to have to involve estimates. And so I would say it is better to go ahead and provide a report that has a lot of estimates in it than it is not to provide something at all. So go ahead and make those estimates and just give a good faith effort, describe in your methodology what your assumptions were. If you wind up using some kind of like spend-based model, whatever, but just go ahead and comply. And then once you're kind of caught up on just getting reports into places that they're already due, I would say that one of the first things to do is to have pretty diligent conversations about what is it that you're actually considered the obligated producer for. And, when you see flow charts and different people's presentations about like how to approach EPR, the first step on it is determine what you're the producer of. And that sounds really, really simple, and it's not. There's a lot of really convoluted language in a lot of these laws and regulations about who is the obligated producer over a certain piece of material. So much so that different people can read it different ways. And that's to the point that I was making about double declaring some of these things. You can have situations where multiple parties read that they are the obligated producer of a certain item. So go ahead and have discussions with your team about like, what are the categories that we are obligated for? Like we determined internally that there were like 4 major categories of things within everything that we sell that we're obligated for. And figuring out what those 4 categories were was very, very helpful. So go ahead and have those conversations so that you're not just looking at a long spreadsheet saying like, what of this do I care about and what do I not? Like, go through those laws, because there is a lot of overlap between them in terms of what you're the obligated producer for. And then only from there can you start to have serious conversations about collecting data on the packaging that you're using for those items. And then to Katie's point, like go ahead and start developing a better system for collecting that information, or at the very least, creating very educated guesses about what you're using there. But all of this to say, don't skip the necessary step of figuring out what you're actually obligated for. Because you may realize that there are things in there that you're not obligated for. Someone else is paying for them. So don't overpay when someone else is going to be paying for it. So do take the time with your legal team or compliance team or whatever to figure that out. It's definitely worthwhile.
Awesome. That was a great answer from both ends. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining today. That was an awesome webinar and we got a lot of great information. I will be following up with everyone with that organ reporting template and additional information regarding what you saw today. And then make sure you keep an eye out for those upcoming California and Colorado templates and additional information from the Sustainable Packaging Data Council. So thank you again. And thank you, Katie and Caroline, for joining us today. We will see you all later.
Thanks to everyone for coming.
Have a good one.